Hi, this is Steve Hosher, and today I'm going to go through a custom cut list mapping using RG3 Mapper. This is kind of a challenging cut list, a little different than normal, so I thought it'd be good to do a video on it. So I've just back up a little bit. I started up Mapper on the newest version. This is 2.1.1.9. When you open Mapper, it just says select cut list, which I've clicked, and now I'm selecting this cut list. So it asks me, it says there is no mapper file for it. Do you want to create one? And yes, I do. That's the point. So this cut list is for a pocket hole optimal with scribing, but it's not an RZG file. So RZG file was originally created by Cabinet Vision. It has all the stuff we need to do scribing. Pocket holes are actually assigned by the mapper when it opens a cut list. So this particular customer has created a column for pocket holes, which is unnecessary. But it's good that they're thinking ahead. So here's the cut list. Now we're going to map it. Now this particular cut list has headers, which is always a big help because then we know what that column is for. So I'm going to just click this box that says copy header to column name, and it automatically throws in these descriptions that are in the headers. So now I'm going to just assign these. That one's quantity, this one's part description, this one is material, this is real easy because these all match our defaults. Thickness, and this one we are going to choose scribes. This one I'm going to call that just a generic text column. We don't really have to do anything with it later, but it might be handy. It doesn't hurt to just go ahead and map it. Order number is, not a predefined field, so we're just going to call it text, UF text. Just to explain a little bit deeper what I'm doing here, we have certain columns or certain fields that we predefine. Those are these ones that are listed in the pull down. And then if it's not something that falls into one of these predefined categories, or then we just say it's either user field text or user field number. And it's always safest to say text, because if there is anything in that column that isn't a number and you call it a number, then it's going to error out when it tries to read it. The only time you would say it's important to call it a number is if you're going to arrange a group in, this is when you're running it in the machine, if you're going to arrange a group numerically, and it's important that the line items in the group are arranged numerically, then you want to call it a number, because otherwise, like, it'll arrange them, even though they're numbers, it'll arrange them kind of in an alphabetical way, like 12 would come before 2, for example, because it starts with a 1. So that's the only time it's important to call a column a number. It's much safer to just call it text. Order line, I'm going to call that a text as well. Sequence, those don't look like sequence numbers, must mean something else. SEQ, well, I'm going to call that text, and certainly this one we want to call text. It's got these backslashes in it. Sometimes special characters, you always are afraid those are going to screw something up, but we've tried to filter that kind of thing out. All right, so I'm just going to check my work here. I'm going to compare, these, what I've assigned. These are this one's such an easy one, it turns out. Everything looks good, so I'm going to click Map the Columns. Columns have been mapped, and now it's important. We have to group. We have to assign the grouping, or the whole thing won't work. Grouping is how we divide the cut list into groups of like, usually material at least. So I'm going to put material and width because I didn't look at how material was specified, but a lot of the time material might just be oak. So yeah, you're going to group all the oak together, but you also want all the 2-inch oak grouped together. So we're going to add width, and then if thickness isn't called out in the material, then we also want to have the right thickness. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. I think like I say, I didn't look at the text in the material column. I guess I'll just go back and check here. Material. So actually thickness and width are called out. So a material of a certain thickness and width would sort itself out strictly by this material description. But I'm going to go ahead and just map width and thickness, or group width and thickness as well. It doesn't hurt anything. And then if they change how they're doing their descriptions, everything will still work. So I'm grouping by material width and thickness. That way groups will be comprised of materials of similar width, material, and thickness. Good. Now the customer may decide when they get it they want to group by other things like order number, but that can all be done at the machine later. But we have to group by something now, and these are certainly the obvious choices. So I'm going to click Save. Mapping has been updated, and the mapping file's been created. So that's it. That's the whole process. Now I am going to, I'm going to explain a little bit about pocket hole machines. Pocket holes are assigned, well, I'll just convert. So there are two ways to do it. You can use Mapper to convert the file in the office and then send that converted file to the machine. Or you can send just your CSV files that are created by your software straight to the machine, and the machine will convert it on the fly. With a pocket hole saw, it's going to, regardless of if you convert it, when the conversion is happening, it's going to, any part description that it sees that it hasn't seen before, it's going to ask, does this part get pocket holes? Scribes are taken care of because there's a column for that, but pocket holes, it asks, does this part get pocket holes? Some people don't want the operator answering that question. They want to do that in the office. Now once it's encountered all the parts that it's ever going to, part descriptions that it's ever going to encounter, and those have been defined, then you don't have to worry about it. Nobody's going to have to answer that again. But up until it's encountered all those different part descriptions, it's going to ask these questions. So the owner, the company, has to decide, do I want to let the operator answer that question, or do we want to do that in the office? And then once like I say, once you've encountered all those, then you can quit doing it in the office and just send the CSV files or RZG files right out to the machine, and the machine will sort that out. So I am going to do it both ways here. So I'm going to convert. So when you convert, you have to choose a mapping file. So this RG3 mapping is where all this information is stored. And so the folder that these cut lists are stored in has to have a mapping file. And RG3 uses that mapping file to convert the CSV file. So it's important that everybody's working from the same folder. So anyway, I'm going to choose this RG3 mapping. And now I select a parts file to convert. So it's going to be this one. And here is that where you assign pocket holes. So I'm going to just assign one. Well, so top rail and bottom rail probably get pocket holes. Rail, I assume this means like a mid style. So that would get one. Internal rail would get one probably. And we'll leave it at. So I have assigned these. Now once it's seen those, it's not going to ask me about them again. In Mapper that you run on your desktop separately, it's going to display this, and you can always go in and change these things. On the machine, once it's seen them, if it doesn't have any questions, it just doesn't give you the opportunity to do this. So that's kind of how all that works. Now, there are some other things here, other attributes that we can assign to part descriptions. For example, reverse scribes. If you have dado, if you dado your face frame material and your stock, so that makes those two styles asymmetrical. You can't just flip one over and put it on the other side of your face, of a door opening, for example, or a drawer bank. You have to we have to reverse the scribes if the material can't be flipped, like in the case of a dadoed. So for certain, like if there's a left, like here we have left style, and these, so with these lefts and rights, the rights may need to be reversed if you're doing dados. So that's what this column's for. And then this functionality isn't in RG3 yet, but everything's in place to do it. When we get it finished, the panel, this is for indicating that the part is, that description is a panel, meaning a glued up panel. And so we treat those differently because we're going to cut the staves to glue up that panel. So you have to indicate if a certain part description is a panel. And then if you do that, you also have to say what the minimum panel width is. So it may be, say it's a drawer slab, and you're not going to glue anything up less than 6 inches. So you would, so if it's a panel but it's 6 inches or less, then we're not going to treat it like a panel. We're just going to cut it off the stick. So that's what that column's for. All right, so I'm going to click done, and then here is all our results. And we can just, now if you wanted to go through and make changes, like you didn't want to cut some of these, you could say it's not a valid part, or you could change pocket holes if there's a certain situation that you want to make certain changes. You can manually go through and change things. And that, but the point is, you don't, you want to make it automatic. If you see that you've missed one or something, you can also go up here and check a new box. Like let's say that we're going to put, here's a top rail. So, oh, I forgot that. I want to make that pocket hole. Oh, I guess this doesn't do that yet. We'll have to look at that. You should be able to click this and then click apply attributes and have it change all this, but apparently it doesn't do that yet. So I'm going to create the cut list. So it's been created. So now if I go to that folder, now we have our original CSV file and the new R3D file that it just created, and of course our mapping file that we created when we did the mapping portion. I am going to copy this and make several more copies. because in RG3, because now I'm going to show how it converts on the fly. In RG3, when it converts it, it deletes this file. So when you're doing testing, you want to be sure and have several copies, or else you lose the original. So I'm going to move this out of the way, and I'm going to start up RG3. This is my demo software. So here's the actual RG3 software. We'll go to AutoList, open file. And here are these files. I'll choose one of these copies. Now, because this RG3 mapping file is present in this folder, this should work. If you like to put your files in multiple folders, then we don't want this here. We want it in a default folder somewhere else. And so now the reason we do it this way is some people have multiple file formats that they want to use. So quantity, length, order number, all these things are in a different order in the different files that they create. So we have to have multiple mappings. So we did this in RG3 for that reason. So you could have 10 folders and 10 different mapping files and 10 different formats. And as long as this file, the correct one, is in the correct folder and the correct files are in the correct folder, then when you open them in the RG3 software, they will map correctly. And the grouping, the printing, and the column display, all that stuff is in here. So you can have 10 different mappings, 10 different label designs, 10 different groupings, 10 different ways you want the columns displayed, and all that will work because it looks at the mapping file that's in the folder with these cut lists. But some people have one mapping and they want to store their file, or they have one file format, but they want to store them in multiple folders. So in those cases, we don't put this in the folder with the files. We put it in a default folder. And so the software will, when it sees that it's opening this file, it'll look for this, and if it's not there, it grabs the default. So that's how all this works. Usually, most people are just going to put this in the folder with their cut lists, and it's just going to work. Now, if you have one format and one folder, you can still just put this in the default folder, and that'll work too. The caveat to that is if this isn't here and you've converted a file, like we've already converted this one, and you didn't finish it, say you shut the thing down and went to lunch and came back, and then now you're not converting a file, you're opening an R3D file that's already been converted. Then if you don't have this here, it's going to look for the default, and if you haven't created a default, then it's going to say, hey, there's no mapping. So you want to do one or the other. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and convert this. Hopefully I didn't screw anything up and it just works, and it did. So here is the current group. This up here you see these tabs. This is the current group. Here are all the groups. Now see, remember I grouped it by material, width, and thickness. So we see these three columns. So this first group is this material type, 5 3/4 width by 0.77 thickness. There are two parts in it. There's 61 inches of length. So you need at least that 61 inches of material to cut all the parts in this group. And it goes like that all the way down. You can choose any group you want and select it. This one only has one part. Let's find, here's one with 125 parts. So that's a big group. And that's how it works. Now if you decide you want to change the grouping, you can go to groups, and here it shows the groups, and here is the grouping definition. You can change this by selecting one of these and throwing it back over here. Now that won't change anything in this particular cut list because of the way they have material description laid out. Let's say I wanted to also sort by order number. I don't know if that's going to make a change. So order number are, they're different. Looks like there are several different orders in here. So yeah, that one group that had 125 parts is now broken up, looks like, into different groups. So now now you can just run an order number or the certain material from a certain order and just run that. So I can select that, and here are the parts that are the same material, width, thickness, and order number. So that's how grouping works. I'm going to, I'll just leave that the way it is. Well, maybe I better, I'm not sure we'll put that back over there. And looks like there's another bug. Can't see the save. Wonder if I can move this over. Ah. Okay. This is all new, so we're still finding these little idiosyncrasies. All right, here's the current group. We've talked about groups. Now I'm going to go to column display. We're showing a whole bunch of columns that we don't need to show, so I'm going to get rid of a bunch of these. Well, I'll show that one in Cutlist. We don't need that. Oh, we have a pocket holes column that we use, that we create, and then they also had their own pocket holes column. So that's is what it is. Scribe's kind of nice to have. Because this customer defines width, thickness in their material, we really probably don't need width and thickness. I don't really think we need ID. Maybe you don't need file name. You can move things up and down too. If you want quantity in the second column, you can move it down, move it up. You can do that with any of these. So I'll update it. Now I'll go back to the current group, and there aren't as many columns. Here's our pocket hole column, and here is the customer's pocket hole column. So what's the part description on this? Bottom rail. Okay. Yeah, that would get pocket holes, so yeah, I missed that one. And that's how all this stuff works. Now you can click all parts and see all the parts in the whole list. And then printer, this is where you would create your label. And then options. You usually want this checked. This just means you don't have to click done at the end of the run. This one means that when it finishes cutting a stick, it automatically will just go back to the load position and take. It doesn't apply to a Razor Optimal because a Razor Optimal scans to determine the load out position. But on an APS, meaning just an auto pusher system that doesn't scan, you maybe are going to cut. Maybe you use all the same length, so you just want to use the length that was already entered and just automatically go back to the load position when it finishes cutting a stick. This one you generally want checked. That means that when it finishes the run, it automatically moves to the scan start position, so you can load a part and scan it. This doesn't apply to an optimal, and this doesn't really either. This is important. If you click this, then whenever it changes groups, it will tell you, hey, check to make sure your pocket holes are in the right position for the width of this new group. And from there, you're basically into the actual operation of the machine. Now you can change the quantities of a certain line item this way. If I change this first line item to 3, you can see we have this original quantity column. That keeps track of what the quantities were originally. And if you click Restore, it changes everything back. This is a dangerous button because if you're halfway through a run and you click it, it just does it. As you can see, it changes it. Now we're going to change it so it asks you, are you sure? That's not there just right this second. So be careful. If you click that, you could really, that's devastating. Now your cut list is all restored to what it was and you don't know what you cut. This is the leading edge trim and trailing edge trim cut. You don't want to make these too small on a pocket hole machine because the pocket hole machine has some little nooks and crannies, and if you cut a sliver of a trim cut, it can drop into a place and jam things up. On an optimal, pocket hole optimal, any of their optimals, you're marking the board with a crayon, so usually it doesn't look at this number. But if you've got a part that has no defects and it's already been cut on both ends, or it's just a clear board, you don't need to make any defects, or there are no defects, like say MDF for example, then it would look at this every time because you're not doing any crayon marks. This is the optimization type. Normally our software is going to optimize in a way we call first fit. That means that it tries to use the longest parts to fill a clear span that it can, which is great for woodworking usually. But sometimes that ends up in, it just prioritizes using long parts, so you maybe don't get as good an optimization yield as you think you should. Exhaustive enumeration, if that's checked, when it optimizes, it's going to just try 10,000 different combinations and use the best one. So you may have a 10-foot clear span and it's going to cut it up into 4-inch parts, which you may not be happy with if you're a woodworker. If you're an aluminum guy, you don't care. That's great because you don't have defects that you have to worry about. So that's what that means. And then the rest of these buttons are just for operating the machine. Scan and run means it's going to scan it and just run it. You're not going to get a chance to view the scan results. Scan and view means it's going to scan it and show you what it found. And push to scan start means it moves to the scan position so you can put the board in there and then scan it. So this ended up being a little more than just a partsless processor video, but I think there's a lot of good information here. One thing that comes up, I'll just go ahead and do this. If you want to create manual parts, this is different than it used to be. So if you want to create manual parts to run, go to pusher mode, list, create a new cut list. You don't have to put in material or description and just click. I'm just going to click add just for the sake of being, but you can put in different links and quantities for each line and then add it. It's pretty self-explanatory. So I'm going to save it, and I'm going to put it in a certain folder. Cutlist, this folder will exist on your machine. Cutlist created manually for AutoList. So I'm going to put that in there. And once you've done that, you can just click cancel and then go to AutoList and run that file. If I would close this and open that one, I would go to that folder. It just defaults to that. So that was test 3. Then I can open that and I can just run that. And then when I'm done with it, I can go back to my other cut list that I had and run one of these. I'll just open an R3D. So there it is. And that this it saves, of course, all the quantities, the things I've cut, so you can close it and open it and not lose where you're at. So that's kind of a overall view of going from the mapper through to the actual operation of the machine. I hope you found it useful. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.